and it just smash cuts to BJ Penn, like on the confessional camera going, wah, wah. You're not a samurai. You couldn't even listen to do anything. You didn't even throw a jab, you idiot. And I was just like, God damn, BJ. Just routinely mocking and like laughing at his team. Just
Yeah.
not giving a fuck.
All right, welcome to another episode of Two Fight Fans, where we talk about all things in combat sports. I'm one fight fan, Colin.
And I'm the other Stewart.
All right, so, Stu, I see you had some extra sphere news.
Yeah,
I've,
we
I've only
talked about.
seen one of these though, so
Okay. Which was the one you've seen?
that Sean O'Malley injured his hip and he's going to require surgery and he's going to be out for like 9 months or something.
Yeah. So kind of seeing like, it sounds like before the fight, and even after a lot of his wins, he comes out and expresses that he had a pretty, what I would call a substantial injury. I don't know how many MMA fighters. There's always that kind of adage that they're always injured coming into a fight, but a torn labrum in his hip, which requires surgery,
Yeah.
which may explain why his footwork kind of looked pretty bad. And it did appear that he, most of the fight was just looking for like the one big counter shot rather than trying to put combinations together or do anything.
Right.
So yeah, that doesn't detract from Merab because for all we know, Merab had a severe injury as well. But it does kind of, and it also explains a little bit of that weird. We didn't talk about this I don't think last episode, but did you? I didn't hear it live because we were chatting it up, but in between the fourth and fifth round, Sean O'Malley's coach said to Sean O'Malley, like, "We're almost done here. Like, we just have one
Yeah.
more round. Like, it's almost over. Like, don't worry." Which is a weird piece of advice to give your fighter, unless they're severely injured. But even then, like, why not just stop the fight if you don't feel like you're gonna win, right?
Right.
Why aggravate the tear in your hip even more? But yeah, I thought that added a little bit of context to the performance, a tiny bit though, because I still think even without the torn hip labrum, it probably would have gone the same way as well.
Yeah. I mean, for all we know, like he might have had a minor injury coming into it, and then just being ragdolled for 5 rounds is what tore it, you know?
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I will say, just based on one thing you just said really quickly, Merab is not injured because I
Mhm.
saw DC posted he went to go interview Merab at his house like on Tuesday or whatever. And DC was like just waiting around because apparently Merab went to go work out. Like
Dude, the guy, an
he went for
absolute.
like a 3 mile run and then like he comes back and DC's just like, hey man, like what are you doing? Like you just won the title. He's like, oh no, this is what I was doing to become the champion. So why wouldn't I keep doing it as champion? And then he still didn't do the interview with DC because he wanted to like complete his workout like at his house before that. So the man is a fucking machine. So props to
He's the champ
Marab.
we deserve. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
he's awesome. He's got to have the metabolism of like a Wolverine though, right? Like it's amazing he's made it past 30 years of age. Because it feels like his body should just shut down. Um, again, like that's so cool. And I really like Marab. I'm so
Yeah.
nervous in like the next like 3 years when his cardio finally falls, not like completely collapses, but like he just doesn't have it quite as much. Or injuries start to pile up.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it is gonna be like, the drop off is gonna be quick, where a lot of these fighters, maybe they can, depending on their style, they can sustain it for a little bit, but this style is very youth dependent.
Yeah. Yeah. Um Marab does strike me as one of those guys though that will go on to be like a fitness influencer or like like a Taibo instructor, and he'll be 70 and be like, it's not about how old you actually are, it's how old you feel, and like he really strikes me as a yeah, cool guy though. I like it. That's like the blue collar working spirit like kind of manifest into a fighter. And like
Yeah.
I kind of like it. It's neat. Yeah. Anyway, But the fight was kind of boring, and that's fine. But we got to talk more about the Sphere because
Yeah.
since we last talked, there's been so many things coming out. We've had like Luke Thomas kind of famously saying that if you didn't like it or you thought the Sphere wasn't that impressive, like you have no joy in your life. A couple other people coming out and saying it was like terrible and not worthwhile at all. Um, People rightly pointing out like if you're gonna do like the history of Mexico and Mexican fighting spirit, is Dana White and the UFC the right author to tell that story? Is that really their story to tell?
Right.
But read some reports of people or people had called in to other like MMA outlets and talked about what the experience was like, and there were a couple of nuggets that I wanted to touch on. So apparently, the screens when you're in that place essentially look 3D, um,
Mm.
which does sound kind of cool. There was that moment where was it after the Day of the Dead segment where the like rose petals were falling
Yeah.
down,
That
and
was
we
kind of cool.
we
Yeah.
from home couldn't tell like what was going on with that.
Well, I
So
actually
that is
asked, were they like I thought like, are they dropping stuff from the
Mhm.
ceiling? Like, are they like at the end of a concert or something? Because I thought
Yeah.
like that's what it looked, but if it was just the screen that made it look like shit was falling into the arena, that's a pretty impressive technological feat there.
Yeah, so that's a pretty cool thing that I think probably just having it be a screen that surrounds everything, like just the movement of something across the screen can kind of give it the illusion of three dimensions.
Mhm.
So that's cool in person. And it was tiny, like the smallest version of cool for us at home. Um, but yeah, like okay, so the screens are cool when you're physically there. Um, Two other things that apparently fans liked was there were haptics in the seat, right? So as things were going
Right.
on, the seat would vibrate, which like I'm not there. I don't know how that felt. I guess that's kind of cool. Whatever. Um, they did have an app that the audience could download so that you could listen to the commentary while watching the fights live.
Right, we had mentioned that, as a possibility, and we didn't know, like, how that was gonna work, so but that was, like,
Mhm.
gonna be the first time where you're in a live event where you could hear the commentary like you were at home, which is
Yeah,
kinda cool.
but like you and I have both been to UFC events. Like I can't imagine unless you have giant noise canceling headphones on, and even then, you gotta crank that shit to 100, like, that you'd be able to actually hear anything through headphones while people are hooting and hollering and, you know, making a bunch of noise, in the Sphere.
Right.
So, but an interesting thing that they did, like, okay,
Yeah.
props to them. Apparently the Sphere was also, like, frigidly cold, like, people were wearing, like, jackets and shit,
Hmm.
because it's just, like, a super cold venue, and so
Do
people
you
said like, it was
do you
actually uncomfortable how cold it was.
do you think that's because, like, all of the, like, displays and everything just need to be kept cool the entire time, or
Oh, that's a good point, I never thought of that. Yeah, like, you can't let it just melt the processor as it's
Yeah.
going, right? They've got, like, 10,000 4090 graphics cards going, and they're gonna turn into goo unless it's, like, icebox in there.
Yeah.
Um, that's a good point, I hadn't thought about that. Um, oh, interesting, yeah. So, yeah, there were those things, and then, like, I know we touched on it a little bit last time, but, like, we have to, like I I keep thinking about it, like, they did the beginning of Mexico with the Aztecs and then the Dios de los Muertos, which isn't really about Mexican heritage. It's, like, kind of a holiday that they celebrate, but they don't celebrate it in the way that, like, Hollywood portrays it.
Right.
Those, like, skull masks and stuff, like, and then they had the revolutionaries, which was interesting, but then that final one, where we thought they were going to go to the moon, just was like a made up fantasy thing of someone flying to a future city.
Yeah.
It had a
Yeah, it
Bud
was future
Light
Mexico.
billboard. Yeah, I know, but, like, was it? It had a Bud Light billboard, and, like, it didn't look like anything where we're like, "Oh, look at that famous Mexican landmark in the background. That looks futuristic now." It was just like, "Look, a robot city." It looked like the city in, like, iRobot. Like, it was like, "Okay, well, why would" So, I just keep thinking about that. I'm like, "Wow, that was your grand finale. That was your grand finale, is you did that stupid shit. You gave me a, like, really lame, like, Marvel knockoff of, like, "Here's the future city, the end." Uh, and they could have gone to the moon, right? You know what I'm saying? Could
Yeah.
have just been like, one day Mexicans will be on the moon, and that would be their big send off, and then we'd have Sean O'Malley and Merab Dvalishvili. walking out. Yeah, weird. Anyway, but I just wanted like a little bit more context for the Sphere because it was a weird event, and the more I think about it, the more I'm like, no, I actually want you to do little changes instead. Like these big things are kind of silly. Change the ring girl outfits. Change just like what it looks like in the venue. Add a little bit more pageantry, so it's not just like this like color by numbers event. But yeah. Anyway, any final thoughts on the Sphere?
No, again, like hearing some of these things, I guess in person would have been really cool to see, but it was not like, yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's cool that they did it, but it's not like, it's not gonna, I'm not super interested to see it again at the Sphere. Like, I could see it just why it's gonna just be a one and done thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like the way we're talking about it is like when you try uh, some food or like a new cuisine. You're like, well, I'm glad I tried it. And you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah, it's like it wasn't great, right? Like I don't really want to eat it, and I didn't really want to eat it in the first place. But I guess I have at least the experience of it now.
yeah,
So when you're grading things on like, do I want a new experience or not a new experience? That's kind of rough.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Anyway, alrighty. So what else are we talking about today?
Well, I thought this was pretty cool to see. Dana White said Tom Aspinall is going to be the backup for John Jones and Stipe. So there's
Now,
like,
why is that cool to see?
well, so in my mind, I think it's just good to have like him recognized as like, okay, he is like the legit uh heavyweight champion that we should all be focused on, you know? But part of me in my head now is gonna say like, well, neither one of these guys are gonna want to pull out now because they would have to fight Tom Aspinall, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. Or they'll, or like this has happened before. John Jones, quite literally, famously, is one of the few like pay-per-view stars that when his opponent pulled out, and I believe the opponent was Dan Henderson, he refused to fight Chael Sonnen. So two undersized people, middleweights. Dan Henderson pulls out, and then when they're like, "We're gonna sub in Chael Sonnen," which we saw how that fight went. John Jones went, "Actually, no. You're not going to sub them in because I'm not going to fight them." So I don't even buy if Stipe pulls out that John will even accept that there is this backup fighter. And that might be the same for Stipe, right? Stipe had retired and was not coming back to fight at all. And it's like only because of this fight is there randomly like this, oh, he's coming back in for one last payday. So he might also just be like, oh, actually, no, I don't need this at all. I
Mhm.
was just doing it for the John Jones payday. Uh, so like, I'm actually still skeptical. I think this is like Dana White doing damage control, being like, I
Mhm.
guess he can be the backup, which apparently like the backup fighters for title fights that weigh in, they have to cut weight. I guess this is heavyweight, so there's no weight cutting, but you probably put in a full training camp. Um, they only get paid like 20K to be a
Mhm.
backup fighter, right? And so for a lot of these people that are weighing in fully and they have to make a big weight cut and have to be prepared to like fight Islam Makhachev and probably pay training partners and nutritionists and coaches, like 20K is nothing, right? Like that's
Yeah.
just enough to like basically cover the expenses of a camp. Uh, so I no, fuck backup fighters. Like fuck that. Like Tom Aspinall should just get the shot, right? Like
Yeah, I
Tom
mean, yes.
Aspinall,
In ideal
you know,
situation, yes, 100%.
yeah, this is peanuts, and I guess like do how firmly do you think like what would be your over under on um if John Jones or Stipe pulls out, will the other one actually accept fighting Tom Aspinall?
Well, it's like you said, Stipe kinda just will do everything, you know? So, like, I could see him accepting.
Him fighting? Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I think you're probably right. Like it is probably more likely that Stipe is just like fine, I'll take the check and then leave.
but my thing is, if John Jones were to drop out for any reason,
Uh
injury, uh, DUI, whatever, would they strip his
huh.
title and then
Mm,
Tom Aspinall would be would be fighting for the undisputed heavyweight title, or would it be Stipe versus Tom for the interim?
God, I don't know. I feel like it would still be for the interim
I feel like
because
they would do that.
yeah, like they have had a chance to strip John Jones this entire time, and they haven't. Or say like, hey, like you'll get a number one, like you'll be a number one contender, but like we're gonna let Tom Aspinall be the undisputed, but then you can come back and like reclaim the belt and go like,
Right.
see, I never actually lost. Right? I never actually lost the light heavyweight belt to a person except myself and my actions. He can say, I never actually lost the heavyweight belt either.
Yeah.
But I mean, they all know. I mean, John Jones has now like said it out loud, like this is his last fight. So, um, yeah, I don't know. It'll be this. Looking at the card overall, I'm like, all right, this is kind of an entertaining card, but like, it's such a weird like Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler will probably be exciting for as long as it lasts. But I'm also like, Michael Chandler sat out for like 2 years waiting for the Conor fight, and he already lost to Charles Oliveira. So Charles Oliveira will probably win again.
Yeah.
The geriatric heavyweight fight,
Ju-
Paul Craig, Bo Nickel, like maybe will be interesting because Paul Craig can get submissions off his back, but a weird card overall, like a very bizarre,
mhm.
um, uncanny, sort of Twin Peaks esque like
Ju-
UFC card. Um, yeah, very strange. Anyway, uh, yeah, I don't know. I hope Tommy Aspinall. I hope he gets his I hope he gets to fight one of. I mean, he never will, right? He's gonna have to go back to fighting Volkovs and Pavloviches. Um, it's gonna be a while till he gets like a really marquee name, unless Alex Pereira goes up
Yeah.
in weight.
Well, there aren't really any marquee names in the heavyweight division right now.
Yeah, or even the light heavyweight. It's just Alex Pereira.
Yeah.
Um, and like it sounds like Alex Pereira is pretty adamant about dropping back down to 185, even though that motherfucker weighs like 230 on fight night. Like
Yeah.
I have no dude, how that guy gets down there.
I
He
have
must be
no
missing
idea.
organs, right? He must just like have less organs than a normal human, so that he can just like shrink his body down even more.
But
Um,
talk about you know, grit and just overall toughness, like to be able to go through like the pre-weight cut during training camp and
mhm.
then like the 20 or 30 pound, water weight loss that he has to go through on the day of, like, and he's what, 36, 37, you said?
Yeah, he's in his late 30s, so
To do
it's
that, that is like that's real tough, and that
yeah,
requires, a discipline. I know, especially me, I've basically like said weight cutting it should be an automatic, but it doesn't mean that it's not difficult, at the professional level. And that is insane that he's doing that. But it's also like I kind of like his approach to it because he's like, God, the middleweight division is like so weak. Like, I hate this right now. I used to be the king of this, and Izzy won. He did great. And they have like a good back and forth now, but now he's like, fuck this. This is so like disappointing to see.
yeah. But also, I'm like, and dude, Drickus, he kind of nailed it. He said like he seemed so blasé when it was like presented to him that Alex Pereira might cut down. He's like, look, man, you got slept by uh, um, Israel Adesanya. I got hit like full power by Israel Adesanya. If you're getting slept by that, you shouldn't come down and fight me. And like, I'm like, he might be right there. And also like the fact that he has that clarity and that like thought, and that isn't like it didn't sound like bravado. It just sounded like
Mhm.
him like kind of expressing like what he believes to be true. I was like, he's probably right. Like he probably Alex. Like you can fight Khalil Roundtree. You can fight like Jamal Hill again 10,000 times and keep getting paychecks. Don't cut the weight. Stay up there. Let Drickus come to you. Um,
Yeah.
because you'll
I mean,
probably need a thicker chin
yeah.
to handle some of this stuff.
That is what I feel is the biggest thing for Alex Pereira when he cuts down is like you're you are losing some of your ability to withstand punishment just because you're already like capped,
Yeah,
you've already injured yourself. So,
yeah.
I mean, and he looks so good at 205. Like I don't need to see him go down to 185,
No,
so
no. Let
but I
him
mean,
like
if that's what
try.
he wants to do, like
Yeah,
he wants to be a double champ or possibly a triple champ, like it's fucking
go up to
impressive.
heavyweight then. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. But like you already did it. Like go up to heavyweight. Let Dricus come to you, and then put an end to Dricus Duplessis for all of us. You know, like don't go down there because I know he sees it, but everyone sees it. Israel saw it. Robert Whitaker saw it. Everyone keeps getting caught in Dricus's web, and like it's like Alex, don't do it, please, for the love of God, just stay at 205. Yeah. So anyway, we'll see. But back to Tom Aspinall. Yeah, that's the only fight that I think that he would get a little bit more shine. That
Yeah.
isn't like stuff that just his performances would manifest himself. Um, yeah. Anyway, yeah, we'll talk more. We're gonna have to do a John Jones and a Stipe retrospective before November,
Mm.
because both of them are going away, and they both have like pretty story. I mean, especially John Jones, really storied careers. And it's just gonna be, oh, man, it's just gonna be two old guys fighting over like the last set of like Dr. Scholl's insoles in a Walmart. You know, it's gonna be sad. Um, anyway, all right. Speaking of heavyweights,
Yeah.
we do have a fight this weekend, the IBF Heavyweight Championship title fight. This is the one we'll all remember where when Usyk beat Fury, the IBF went, well, he needs to defend it immediately. And if he takes the rematch with Fury, the most important fight in heavyweight boxing in the past like 10 years, we're going to strip him of the title because the
Yeah.
IBF is against fun and hates puppies and birthday cake and all that shit. But now we get Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois for the IBF title. So overall, like this is probably like top 3 or 4 best heavyweight fights you could make at the moment.
Okay.
It is cool to see Anthony Joshua kind of like come back and reinvent himself. I don't know if like when he's put up against Tyson Fury or Usyk, that he'll uh, have any different result than we've seen when he struggles with adversity. And Daniel Dubois has shown that like, I mean, he did get torched by Usyk, but everyone basically does.
Yeah.
So these are both very good fighters. Do you have any? What's your interest level, 1 through 10, on this fight?
You know, I just the circumstances behind it, like just it does sour it for me. You know, that like basically the IBF stripped Usyk of his title that
Mm-hmm.
and it's like it's not even like, you know, Usyk has been sitting around for like months or years not defending, you know, for whatever reason. It's
Mm-hmm.
literally like the IBF didn't just want to play by their own rules. Like it's literally them again, like we talked about before, taking their ball and going home. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't like that. And it's not Dubois or Joshua's fault that the circumstances are surrounding that, but that kind of taints the whole thing for me.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like you said, it is interesting to see Anthony Joshua because, like, you know, he was actually the name that I knew before Usyk. You know, I didn't know anything about Usyk until we started talking about him doing this podcast, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because I also wasn't really watching boxing, but I did know Anthony Joshua, and uh, yeah, I if it didn't have the circumstances surrounding it, I think it would be a more entertaining fight. So I don't like to say, but I could definitely feel it that uh the politics are kind of influencing the actual fight for me, which is
Definitely.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
but both these guys, I mean, you have two dominant heavyweights right now with Usyk and Fury, and it's kind of like what we talked about last time with, you know, Brian Ortega and Alexander Gustafsson. Like Anthony Joshua could have been like the continued like biggest name in heavyweight
mm-hmm.
boxing if it weren't for those two, you know?
Yeah.
So again, it's just like timing. Timing's everything.
Yeah. Exactly. And like Daniel Dubois could have been like he could have been a bigger name too.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
that's true.
we just have like actual generational greats with Tyson Fury and I mean Usyk, who might be like a divisional, like truly like in the elite top 10, maybe even top 5 for heavyweight boxers that have ever
Right.
been. Um, and so yeah, they're kind of stuck on the outside, looking in. It should be a good fight. I mean, they both are. I mean, it's heavyweight boxing. It's not always heavy-handed, but these guys are heavy-handed heavyweight boxers. They're usually getting finishes. They are pretty good fighting in multiple areas. They're both like super athletic. So this probably should be a heavyweight fight where you can assume that there will be a knockout or at least, several knockdowns during the fight. I think Joshua is just too big and athletic and powerful for Dubois. But Dubois
Mhm.
was able to drop Usyk with a body shot. Well, it was below the belt, but he had enough power to be able to like make one of the best heavyweight boxers alive drop to his knees, regardless of kind of where he placed that shot. But yeah, like this should be a good fight. Like I don't know, this is entertaining, and I guess like the hope for boxing fans will be that hopefully Joshua wins, and then regardless of what happens in the Usyk Fury rematch, we finally get Joshua Fury, because that's been kind of a fight that's been circling for so long. That would be it'd be pretty entertaining to see that. Yeah, so a good fight overall, I think. Yeah, the IBF heavyweight title. I'm just thinking of it as like this is basically the number one contender fight for either Fury or Usyk, whoever comes out the winner
Mhm.
at the end of their fight in December.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Do you have a prediction for it? I
oh
I personally don't.
yeah, Joshua inside of 10.
Oh,
I
wow,
think
okay.
is probably what it'll be. Yeah, Daniel Dubois is just like he opens himself up a little bit too much,
Mhm.
and is really susceptible to somebody who has a pretty decent straight jab. And Joshua has a pretty decent straight jab and hits really fucking hard.
Yeah.
A lot harder than Usyk. So, yeah, I think Dubois will probably. Though again, we've seen when Joshua runs into like really tough adversity, he can kind of mentally crumble in certain rounds.
Mhm.
Um, but he's riding high off that confidence of absolutely smoking Francis Ngannou.
Yeah.
So uh, hopefully that confidence carries over. Yeah, and I mean Joshua hasn't lost anyone not named Usyk or oh, I'm forgetting his name now. Short chubby man that looks like me with fast hands. We're
Oh,
talking. Help
God.
me. Oh, this is terrible.
Yeah.
This
How
is how you know that our brains are mashed potatoes. What? God damn it! He's a short Mexican heavyweight
Oh,
boxer who
Andy
just
Ruiz.
fought Andy Ruiz, fought Big Baby. Yeah. So yeah, he's only lost to Andy Ruiz and Alexander Usyk. Like that's not that bad. Whereas Dubois, actually, I don't know who else Dubois has lost against except Usyk. So I might be kind of making a pretty bad equivalent here. But let me look. Anyway, so yeah, it should be a good fight. It's the only thing going on this weekend. Oh yeah, he's lost to Alexander Usyk and Joe Joyce. Oh man, you lost to Joe Joyce. Now you're getting fucked then. You can't lose to Joe Joyce. Yeah. So should be good, right? There's no UFC. There's not a lot of MMA this weekend. So yeah, it's good. Throw heavyweight boxing on. It's always entertaining. Catch it at a bar or something, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Alrighty. Well, as punishment for routinely being an idiot and picking things incorrectly, I went back and I actually watched a lot of BJ Penn fights.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I will say, watching BJ Penn fights, except for his last like 8, uh, actually not that much of a punishment. Actually, a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, he the equivalent that I've come to on him is sort of like Khabib. Khabib was only around for a short time as a champion. And the thing that was like most impressive about Khabib was like the utter dominance in his short run at lightweight
Mhm.
uh, that he displayed, right? And then we never got to see any sort of drop off from him because he retired. Whereas BJ Penn, we got to see the drop off when you
Yeah.
don't retire. But there was a period of time where he just was so kind of like phenomenally dominant, and not in the way that Khabib was, where it's like classic, I take you down, I do this stuff, but like knocking people out, boxing people up, taking people's back and like using his legs with so much dexterity that like you've never seen it before. That it like all around he was dominating these people in like every facet of the game. And like absolutely savage. So
Yeah.
let's go back. When was the first time you saw a BJ Penn fight? Do you
The
remember?
very
Or like
first
which
one,
first fight it was?
I think it was the Sean Shirk fight.
The Sean Shirk fight. Okay. So so you didn't even see him win the title. Uh
No. I mean, I
oh
saw these on, like,
wow.
replay or, like, highlights, but actually just going back really quickly,
Yeah.
I did not know that his first professional UFC fight was in the UFC, was at UFC 31. I don't
Yeah.
know who Joey Gilbert is, but, like, that's
He-
insane to me, and the reason apparently, when I was researching him a little bit, and I knew that he had, like, gotten his, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in, like, record time, and this was
3
back when,
years.
yeah, 3 years, and this was back when, like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was not as popular as it is today, so you didn't have as much, like,
No,
uh
and he was a
yeah,
legit black belt too.
yeah,
It
that's
wasn't
what I
some
mean,
like
yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
he, like, won, the world championships, like, a week or 2 after getting his black belt, so, like, it the nickname The Prodigy is definitely fitting for him, which I definitely
Mhm.
wanna talk about later on, but, like, I didn't know that his first professional MMA fight was already at the big show in the UFC, like, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk quickly because his 13th fight was the first one I saw. So let's quickly talk about his first 12,
Yeah,
just like a recap for people. Yeah, so he debuts in the UFC and he wins his first fight by TKO punches. I watched the Joey Gilbert fight. He basically took him down, flattened him out, and from back mount just pounded the dude out. Then he
alright.
KOs Dean Thomas. Dean Thomas, like a famous coach who's coaching Tyron Woodley, has coached multiple
Yeah,
champions and is like a commentator for the UFC now, like a real legit lightweight. BJ Penn in 2 minutes and 42 seconds knocks this fool out.
yeah,
Then in 11 seconds, he knocks out Kal Uno, who a lot of newer fans won't know, and even like older fans, was like a legitimate, like high level prospect out of Japan and went on to, I think, get titles in other MMA organizations and like
mhm,
respected MMA organizations back then. Yeah, he was the Shudo lightweight champion. He was like seen as, hey, it's him and Jens Pulver are like the two best lightweights on earth.
yeah,
Um, he knocks him out. He loses a majority decision to Jens Pulver, so he takes the first 2 rounds and almost finishes Jens Pulver. But then something that we'll see kind of in BJ Penn's career is his fading towards the back half
yeah,
overall, and
and
that's what we see there.
the uh oh, no, this was for the lightweight championship, that's
Yeah,
right.
that was for the lightweight. Then he TKOs Paul Creighton. So he's won by only KO and TKO within 2 rounds in his UFC debut. He's 5 fights in. Then he defeats future welterweight champion Matt Serra. Uh, Goes to a decision on this one, but this is a super back and forth fight, and this is back when Matt Serra had like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that a lot of people had never even seen,
Yeah,
and his like BJ Penn just was routinely nullifying Matt Serra and then like getting better positions and going for submissions. He then fights Kal Una again. There had been, I believe, a contract dispute with Jens Pulver, who then left the UFC. And so Kal Uno and BJ Penn were put into a fight to decide who would be the new lightweight champion.
yeah, this was
And
the lightweight tournament with him, and the first round was between him and Matt Serra, right?
yeah. hmm And I don't know who I think maybe Kal Uno fought Dean Thomas for it. Let me look. But anyway, this ended up being the death of, and we've talked about this before. Oh yeah, it was Kal Uno versus Dean Thomas. The death of UFC lightweight division for a little bit. This fight went to a draw. It was a pretty
Yeah,
entertaining fight. It was a lot slower paced and like it wasn't the like savage violence that BJ Penn had, where he's just knocking people out routinely and then slapping his own face. Um, but then the UFC is like, "Oh, we're just going to cut the lightweight division." And they cut it for I think 5 years. And you're like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Or 3 years. Why did you cut this division? This is crazy.
mhm,
Um, and so then BJ Penn leaves the UFC and then goes over and fights who would become known as the best lightweight in Pride, Takanori Gomi, and
yep,
submits him in 3 rounds. Right? So, like, he leaves the UFC, then goes and is like, "Okay, well, like, this is the biggest guy, outside of the UFC at lightweight. I'll just take him out," and submits him, super easily. And this was kind of his thing. BJ Penn was so good at being on the feet and overwhelming people and then getting to the back. And it's, if you ever go look at the highlights of him, like he'll use his legs. He can like lift them like an arm and like wrap somebody's hand so it's pinned by their side and
Yeah.
then get the choke.
We'll
It's
talk about it
super
later on, but that
impressive.
was the first time I saw that was when he did that against Kenny Florian, and I was like,
Yeah,
"What the hell is this?" Like,
yeah, so impressive. So then the UFC invites him back on short notice to move up in weight and fight Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes, a pretty giant welterweight at the time.
yeah.
And BJ Penn comes in looking soft and doughy and like a Cabbage Patch Kid. And then in one round, Matt Hughes shoots for a takedown. BJ Penn's guard and his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is so good, he immediately sweeps, reverses, gets to the back, and then chokes out Matt Hughes, who had been this like ultra dominant champion up until this point. And he had bloodied Matt Hughes' nose. And I'll never forget, he's choking him out. He stands up and then he kisses Matt Hughes right on the lips.
Yep.
And Matt Hughes had been like partially out, like had gone unconscious because he just looked so doe-eyed and like, what's happening? Why did I just get kissed on the face by this guy? Yeah, so BJ Penn kisses him on the mouth after choking him out and then starts running around the cage, slapping his face and like screaming. And you're like, this guy's a little unhinged.
Oh
This
yeah.
kind of a psycho. And so then he wins a welterweight championship, uh, which is, yeah, phenomenal. Then he's stripped of the title after a contract dispute, and then he fights four names, which are I still can't believe that this happened. He fights at welterweight. He decides, oh, I like not cutting weight or really training, which is another kind of like classic BJ Pennism is like, I just actually don't like training. I just like being, like you alluded to with his nickname, a prodigy. Like I
Yes.
just am so innately good and have such preternatural abilities. I don't really need to train. So he goes to fight famous coach to Team Alpha Male and TJ Dillashaw, Dwayne Ludwig,
Yep.
and submits him in a round. He then moves up to middleweight. So he went from weighing 155 to now he's 135. And like
No,
BJ Penn
185.
185. BJ Penn will now drop down to 145 later in his career. Like he's not that big of a guy. He's not even a big he's not even a big featherweight. And he's now at 185. And he fights Rodrigo Gracie. And Rodrigo Gracie is like 6 inches taller than this motherfucker and just like smushes him into the mat, but still can't submit him. Uh, oh no, BJ Penn wins this fight.
Yeah.
Am I thinking of the Henzo Gracie one?
No, he beats Henzo Gracie as well.
Wow. So yeah, middleweight. Maybe I anyway. It looks like he's got a win against Rodrigo Gracie. I don't recall it exactly. But then
He,
he moves up and fights at
oh,
205. Oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
It was an open weight bout, which
Oh my god.
what the fuck? Like I did not. I forgot like those things existed like back in like K1 and Pride days where you could just be like, sure, like
I weigh whatever.
yeah.
Yeah. It's
And who
nuts.
does he fight? Lyoto Machida.
Yeah. Future 205 champion,
Yeah.
Lyoto Machida. Like somebody who knocked out Rashad Evans and kicked the tooth out of former heavyweight champion Randy Couture's face. And BJ Penn goes, I want that smoke. I'm going to fight Lyoto Machida. Like he just, and he weighed 191 pounds for that contest.
Yeah.
He's like 40 pounds heavier than he should be. It's crazy. He definitely loses that fight because he can't do anything. Lyoto Machida is just way too big. And then not learning that he should probably train a little bit and not weigh 191 pounds, he goes, I'm going to fight Henzo Gracie at 191 pounds and wins that one.
Yep.
Like, it's insane. He just went on this, like, sprint of being like, I'm just not going to train or do anything and just get as fat as possible. Because when we say he went up to 191, he's not jacked. He's so doughy, it's crazy. He doesn't even look like the same person. He looks like someone cosplaying as a sumo wrestler. Like, it's so weird. Yeah. Anyway, and then this is the first time I saw him fight, which was George St. Pierre, and this was the title eliminator to fight against Matt Hughes. This is definitely one of those fights where, back in 2006, if you got a takedown, even if it was only one, and like you had like 30 seconds of control, that basically won you the round unless you got dropped. Like, do you remember
Right.
when it used to be Like damage actually wasn't. It was mostly can you get a takedown, and that's how you want to fight.
Mhm.
Um, and this is definitely one of those fights where if it was scored now, BJ Penn would have definitely beaten George St. Pierre. Like he was boxing him up, he swelled up his eye, he busted his nose, and George St. Pierre would like fight tooth and nail to get these takedowns. And every round he got one or two takedowns and was able to kind of control and not be submitted. Um, but this was this thing where I didn't know who BJ Penn was up until this point, and I've always been a big George St. Pierre fanboy. So I
Right.
was like, oh, like this guy. They talked about like, oh, he had submitted Matt Hughes, but he's actually a 155er, and he comes in. I mean, George St. Pierre looks like like a Roman statue of a god, and then BJ Penn comes in, looks like some chubby dude down the street, balding, and takes it to George St. Pierre. So I was super impressed. I was like, who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, just crazy. And then George St. Pierre got injured. So George St. Pierre wins the title eliminator, gets to fight Matt Hughes at UFC 163 in September of that year, but gets injured. And then on short notice, they call up BJ Penn and say, hey, do you want to fight Matt Hughes again? And this was a fight, again, where we see BJ Penn kind of hitting his like limit on not training or not
Yeah.
being in shape. Because the first round, maybe first two or like first and a half round, he's taking it to Matt Hughes. Like Matt Hughes is getting boxed up. Matt Hughes is really struggling with the takedown. And even when he gets the takedown, like he can't do anything. And BJ Penn is threatening submissions constantly. Uh, and then BJ Penn just gets tired as fuck. Just so exhausted. And Matt Hughes gets him into, I think probably besides Valentina Shevchenko, the only time in a title fight where I've seen someone get like a full mounted crucifix and then just drop punches on the
Oh,
person's face,
right.
like 30 or 40 unanswered punches to BJ Penn's face. And the crazy thing, another hallmark of BJ Penn, until like he started like losing really badly, is the dude never cut. His eyes never got swollen. He never got like bruised. His like face was kind of like shoe leather. Like he just never, no matter what damage he was dealt to him, he never got hurt, um, which was crazy.
Yeah.
So he loses to Matt Hughes, not because he tapped or like was unconscious, but just like he just literally couldn't defend himself because he's in this mounted crucifix, just taking punches. And so they stopped the fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then begins his lightweight run.
Yes.
They
And I realized this is where I've actually seen him because this is when I watched The Ultimate Fighter and I
Yeah.
saw that he was on he was the coach for it.
Do you have any favorite memories of BJ Penn on that Ultimate Fighter?
Yeah, I so apparently one of his fighters was also this Ultimate Fighter season was ridiculous. They had Joe Lozon on it, Manny Gambirian, Gray Maynard, Nate Diaz, like some
Yeah,
pretty like big names that came from it here. And it was the first time they did lightweights, and it was like all turned out to be like this crazy, like insane house, which it always is and tough. But one of his fighters on BJ Penn's team basically like was just dicking around the whole time and basically couldn't like was not taking training seriously, which is kind of funny given BJ Penn and like
yeah,
during his lead up to one of his fights, like wasn't gonna make weight and he like wasn't dieting right and basically he was in the sauna and he like basically like kind of collapses and like tries to like leave the sauna and all of his teammates are trying to like pull him back in and everything. And he's like saying this thing like, "Oh, put me back in, put me back in." And BJ Penn's just standing there like, "Put yourself back in. Like if you want this enough, like do it yourself. Like stop being
yeah,
a baby." And just basically had no sympathy for this guy.
yeah. This was I know, like think about like this is the fifth season of the Ultimate Fighter. We're on like what season 37 or some shit.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
this is and right, this is where, like you said, Nate Diaz came from, Manny Gambirian, Gray Maynard, like title challengers and title holders and like famous people in the UFC. That was Gabe Rudiger, who refused to
Thank you.
diet and like yeah. My favorite was when Andy in the first round, Andy Wang fought Brandon Melendez, and Andy Wang just like you hear the corner shouting advice, and Andy just does the exact opposite of like everything they say to do, and just like has a pretty bad fight and like pretty convincingly loses. and then goes to the corner and obviously overcome with emotion. Men are allowed to cry, but begins to sob pretty heavily and goes like, "I've just disappointed everyone. But I'm still a samurai." And it just smash cuts to BJ Penn like on the confessional camera going, "Wah, wah. You're not a samurai. You couldn't even listen to do anything. You didn't even throw a jab, you idiot." And I was just like, "God damn, BJ." Just routinely mocking and like laughing at his team, just
Yeah.
not giving a fuck. It just showed I don't know what BJ Penn was like in real life. He might have been a nice guy, but he has such a kind of sociopathic mean streak in his fights that I'm like, this guy might actually just like hate everyone else on earth.
Yeah.
He actually is just kind of like cold blooded in a real way. Um, yeah, it was a good one. Also, like when they started off and they went to pick the teams, he said like, "I'm not going to pick anyone. I'm just like, come over here to this side of the mat if you don't want anything to do with Jens Pulver." And then he
Oh
brings his hand up.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, dude,
Oh,
what a dick! Like, what
and
an
not
absolute dick.
he didn't say if you want to be with me. It's if
Yeah,
you don't want to be with him.
yeah,
I
just like
totally forgot about that.
an absolute dick. Just what an asshat. Yeah,
That is
uh,
fantastic.
yeah. So that's that.
It's
So
great
that this
reality
was the
TV, but you know,
yeah. Yeah, no, this was back when the Ultimate Fighter was good, right? Nate Diaz, Manny
yeah,
Gamburian, like these were title challengers. Gray Maynard, these were title challengers. These were good fighters. This was
yeah.
before Dana White contender. Before this was how like up and comers really got into the UFC. So there was a much better crop of people. And BJ Penn's an insane man, so it's good TV. But at the Ultimate Fighter finale, he fights Jens Pulver. And this is exactly what we talked about. He gets the rear naked choke in the second round. He takes the back, and then Jens Pulver is fighting the hands. And BJ Penn just like lifts his heel up and uses it to pry away Jens Pulver's hand. So the submission comes with Jens Pulver having one arm pinned to his side by BJ Penn's legs,
Hmm,
and choking Jens Pulver out.
yeah.
And this was a sort of like, whoa. BJ Penn's kind of like he's coming back. He's in shape. He's fighting at 155, and he just looked like ferocious in this fight. And you kind of caveated a little about like, well, it's Jens Pulver who's pretty old at this time, but it was still super impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you didn't see the Joe Stevenson fight?
Not live. I have seen
Okay.
it like in replay and whatnot.
Okay. Yeah. Because at this time it had been Sean Sherk had beaten Kenny Florian for the inaugural UFC lightweight title when it came back. But
Right.
then he tested positive for steroids.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
he tested positive for 10,000 things. I mean, look at the guy. His nickname is the Muscle Shark. He looks like was made in a factory. But no harm, no foul. Like, whatever. So he gets stripped, and so then it becomes Joe Stevenson and BJ Penn for the title. Tell me what you remember of this fight or what you've seen in replays of this fight.
All right. Let me try to recap on this here. I actually like.
I'll recap it for you slightly. If you've
Okay.
ever seen a clip where BJ Penn is beating the bejesus out of someone who looks like they have an axe wound to the head and is covered in blood, that's the Joe Stevenson fight. He kneed Joe Stevenson and punched him in the head over the course of 2 rounds that by the end of the fight, Joe Stevenson's wearing a like crimson mask. Just
Oh, is this the one where his
covered
head
in
was
blood.
like basically like dyed red because of all the
Yeah.
bleeding from the cuts that he was sustained?
Yeah, and just like it's down in his eyes and into his own mouth. And like BJ, you could see a couple of shots where BJ Penn is like punching him, and there's just like a splatter effect of blood flying off this dude's head.
Oh, yeah.
And he again takes him down, takes his back, chokes him out, kind of in a similar way that he does so many times. And then this is where he stands up. His hands and gloves are covered in blood, Joe Stevenson's blood, and BJ Penn proceeds to lick the blood off of his gloves
Right. This is
and
where he
like
started his
scream into the
celebration.
air. Yeah, and so you go like, uh-oh, this guy's crazy. This guy's an insane person. Um, and Joe Stevenson again, kind of in the way that like Andy Wang sat up and like started to cry. Like it it must have been so defeating for Joe Stevenson. I mean, not only to lose out on your first title, which like crying for that, like that's what happens when you want something and then you're sad. But like it must have been so overwhelming to realize in that moment, like, I actually probably am never going to be able to touch BJ Penn. Like,
Yeah.
it was such a dominant first round, and then he finished him in the second. Like, it was just such a dominant fight where like almost no offense was landed against BJ Penn this whole fight. He just took it to Joe Stevenson, split his head open, and then licked his blood like a vampire.
Yeah.
Like, yikes. Yikes, man.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah. A bad time. A bad time had by all. Yeah. And then Sean Shirk comes back. What do you remember of the Sean Shirk BJ Penn fight?
This is the one that they have on like every highlight reel where basically at the end of the third round, like basically he's getting beaten up the most of the fight, and he's like backs up to the edge of the cage, and BJ Penn like charges in and reads Sean Shirk like a book because Sean Shirk is going to die for a takedown, and he sends a flying knee straight into him, and then just follows up with multiple punches against the cage as Sean Shirk is basically like knocked out, like holding on to his leg and just slamming him again and again and again into the his head into the cage, and then the round ends, and basically the referee calls it at that point though because like Sean Shirk can't recover enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like and this one showed to me because Sean Shirk, his last fight was against Hermes Franca, and it must have been like a dozen flying knees. It shows that like BJ Penn also was like now learning about tape study or learning about like picking up on like habits of other fighters because yeah, it was the flying knee that like sent him into the cage and then punched the shit out of him. Yeah, it was again a fight where like Sean Shark I think did get a few takedowns, but like was not really that successful at all. And so it was this thing of like, who can touch BJ Penn? Like, if Sean Shark can't even wrestle him, there's no one in this division who can do anything. And it's like for a 3 fight run at lightweight, it's like he barely got touched. It seems super easy. It was
Yeah.
kind of akin to like Hamzat Chimaev. I mean, like Hamzat was like knocking people out like really, really fast. But these are high level like title challengers, and BJ is running through them like it was kind of nothing. Yeah, it was pretty like almost spooky to see.
Yeah.
Because he seemed unhinged. He laughed at everyone when they cried. He licked their blood. Like he just a madman, just a madman.
Yeah.
And then the very first like attempt to go be a double champ, like be a champ happened here.
Yeah.
UFC 94. He moves up to 170 again to fight the kind of newly crowned king shit George St. Pierre, who's just on the beginning of his title run.
Yep.
I think it was around this time too that he had brought in the Marinovich brothers, who were a strength and conditioning. I don't know how much of their stuff was like super scientifically backed, but like BJ Penn's getting 6-pack abs now. BJ Penn's like actually doing strength and conditioning, has a training schedule, is actually like thinking about a little bit of sports science and like how to actually run a fight camp. And this is the one where in the countdown show leading up to it, BJ Penn said like I'm coming to kill you, George St. Pierre, and you're gonna like have to kill me. And everyone was like, holy shit. Do you remember watching this fight?
Yeah.
What do you remember of this fight?
I remember the first round being somewhat competitive.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think GSP still won the first round, but it was like
Yeah.
fairly close. But as soon as after that first round, then it just became very one-sided. And I remember in the this kind of start in retrospective, kind of started my whole thought of like, is BJ Penn one of those like generational talents who has relied solely on talent? And when things get tough, it's really hard for him to like pull himself out of that, you know?
Yeah.
And we kind of see this like going forward after this here because like everything leading up to this has been a dominant win. Like I don't want to say life has been easy for him because that's not what the case, but like he was so far above all of his other challenges basically.
Yeah.
You know? And like his only like big loss or up to this point have been against people who were like way bigger than him. So
Yeah.
um, but yeah, this one was yeah, it was pretty one-sided, and in my mind, it was very much like, okay, this is why, like, it's so hard to move up in weight and try to challenge for a title when you are the current lightweight title holder, Like, there's a reason why weight classes exist, because
Yeah.
George was, like, just basically just at will doing whatever he wanted, whether it was from the striking or the takedown, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he routinely kind of just ragdolling BJ Penn on the ground and controlling him and landing shots to the body, which was a huge thing, right? To tire out BJ. We know he slows down. Um, really just landing in on him. And then, yeah, at the end of the fourth round, BJ goes back to the corner and says, "No mas."
Yeah.
And they stop the fight. Uh, no, yeah, and this is and what a like at the time we're like, wow, both these guys are really good. But even now, like George St. Pierre in my mind is still the best fighter that has ever done it, and like BJ Penn is still one of the best lightweights. So it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, I guess the equivalent or the closest equivalent would be if like at the height of Kamaru Usman's power, if Khabib had gone up and fought him, and then Kamaru ragdoll and beat the shit out of uh, Khabib, right? That would
Mhm.
be like pretty impressive. Um, so yeah, it was. But again, this crazy thing, BJ Penn had like not a single mark on his face by the end of this fight. He did not look hurt at all. He just looked tired, which I thought was crazy. Because like George St. Pierre, like he'd eaten quite a few jabs in the first round, so his eyes kind of like were swollen slightly, and he had a couple of cuts on his face. But BJ Penn looked like, he just went for like a hard run and was tired. Like it was such a bizarre thing to see how much damage he could take and actually have it like never present outwardly on his body. Yeah. All right. Next two fights, Kenny Florian. You mentioned seeing that one. Do you remember
Yeah.
any of the crazy shit that he did to Kenny Florian in this fight?
Well, it's the same thing where he pinned the arm to the side to get that rear
Yeah.
naked choke,
When
and
he also
oh
would
no,
drop
he
the
also used
heel.
yeah, to hit to the liver or something,
Yeah.
like, while he had the back mount, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like would be like spearing his heel into like his solar plexus and shit as well when he was on his back. Um, this was something as well where like I love Kenny Florian, but like he just was so outclassed that
Yeah,
like no matter what happened, his biggest option was to try to like be really defensive. And so it took 4 rounds, but like BJ barely got touched in this fight as well. And Kenny Florian was like a really legitimate like he had fought and like if takedowns weren't as scored as strongly, if it was more about damage, he might have beaten Sean Shirk. Um,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it just wasn't the case. And then his last like major, well, maybe not last major one, but last time of seeing dominant BJ Penn was when he
yeah,
fought Diego Sanchez. And I love Diego, man. He probably shouldn't have fought in this fight. Like I don't know, but like this was a kind of. I mean, there's a lot of champions now that fight lower ranked contenders, and this was kind of a lower ranked one. Um, but this was just a clinic by BJ Penn. Like
yeah,
it again. Diego could do absolutely nothing, and BJ could do everything. BJ would box him up on the feet. He was like, for the first time, like really having like tight and powerful knees and elbows in the clinch. And then when it went to the ground, he was constantly threatening submissions and like sweeping and kind of like from the bottom and then even the top, ragdolling Diego Sanchez around. And Diego again had won the Ultimate Fighter at middleweight at
yeah,
185. And BJ Penn is like making it seem like Diego Sanchez came up from a lower weight class.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and
and
phenomenal.
if I remember correctly, isn't this the one where, like, in the very first like, almost the first, strike that BJ Penn threw, he, like, dropped him, like
Yeah, I think like yeah,
he,
it
like,
was like
staggered him, and, like,
yeah,
from that point on, he was just, like, on the back foot the entire time, and Diego Sanchez was coming off of that, like, fight of the year, match with Clay Guida,
hmm
and he was, like, pretty popular, and people thought, like, "Okay, like, he's gonna take it. He's gonna put on pressure on BJ Penn. Like he's gonna put on this like unrelenting, pace that, you know, people start to see the holes in BJ Penn's game, where he tires out. So maybe Diego Sanchez can actually drag him into deep waters. And literally the moment he like stepped in to like start the opening combination of the fight, he just gets rocked by this like right hand or whatever it was
Yeah.
that BJ Penn threw, and could not muster anything after that.
Yeah. And it's hard to because like Diego Sanchez has kind of had a BJ Penn-esque career as well. But coming into this fight, he had beaten Kenny Florian by TKO. He had TKO Brian Gassaway, who was an okay fighter at welterweight. He beat Nick Diaz at welterweight. He knocked the tooth out of Carl Parisian's face at welterweight. He knocked out Joe Riggs, a former welterweight contender. He lost a very boring decision by Josh Koscheck. And then uh, with uh John, like he lost to John Fish and Josh Koscheck, which like they were big welterweights who controlled him. And then he went down to lightweight and beat Joe Stevenson, beat Clay Guida. He had two TKOs after losing John Fitch. So he was 21-2 going into this fight
Mm,
with BJ Penn, right?
yeah.
Like he'd never been dominated, really. Like he'd always been beating like anyone they put in front of him. And BJ Penn made it look like he shouldn't even be in this division. It was crazy. It was
Yeah.
crazy. Uh, yeah. Anyway, so that's the run of BJ Penn. Oh no, wait. There's a bunch of other fights after this.
Yeah.
But
Well,
that was the like
the
he
next
would have.
two were good
Yeah.
fights, you know?
Yeah. But BJ in the Diego Sanchez fight, BJ looks kind of not shredded because he never had like the genetics to look shredded, but he had a six-pack abs. He looked lean. He looked explosive. He came into those Frankie Edgar fights looking a little soft. Like
Mhm.
he kind of it went to his head. Like I'm destroying these dudes, so it doesn't matter what I do.
Mhm.
And then he ran into Frankie Edgar, my boy from Jersey, and Frankie Edgar had the right game plan, and BJ Penn looked human, right?
Yeah.
It's like it really does feel like this. Like if BJ Penn retired after Diego Sanchez, he would kind of have that like Khabib mystique. But
Yeah.
then, like, imagine if like Khabib stayed around and then Volkanovski made Khabib look human. Like
Oh.
that's kind of what this felt like, you
Uh-huh.
know? Like it suddenly felt like, oh shit, like all those things that made him look so dominant, he actually can't do it against this guy. Like what's going on?
Mhm.
Um, yeah. And Frank Yeager, a great champion that nobody like talks about enough. And so yeah, BJ Penn loses twice, and then he goes up to welterweight again and has his trilogy fight with Matt Hughes
Yep.
and only took 21 seconds, a 1-2. I mean, flatlined Matt Hughes, um, which is kind of crazy. And then he goes and fights John Fitch, who we thought, well, we saw what George St. Pierre could do to him when it's a big, strong, athletic wrestler. And BJ Penn stuffed almost every takedown, and it ended up being a majority draw uh, in this fight. Even though, like, watching it live, I think think that I scored it for BJ Penn, but it ended up being a draw, and that was supposed
Yeah.
to be the title eliminator to like refight George St. Pierre. Um, and then the skid happens.
Yeah.
Uh, he fights Nick Diaz, and this is the first fight where, I mean, he gets boxed up like for 3 rounds hard, and this is the first time where like his face is messed up. Like his eyes are swollen. His face kind of looks like ground beef at the end of the fight. And it's the first time he wears damage really at all in a fight. And then he goes and fights Rory McDonald, where the same thing, just gets beaten to pieces. His face is all fucked up. I was there live in Seattle, Washington, and the crowd kind of was like, "All right, let's stop this now, please, thank you."
Oh.
Then he retires, goes to featherweight, loses to Frankie Edgar, gets TKO'd by Yair Rodriguez, loses to Dennis Seaver, gets submitted by Ryan Hall, loses to Clay Guida in a pretty bad fight. Yeah, just a lot of losses after that.
Yeah.
But I prefer to remember BJ Penn as the guy who licked blood off his hands and beat the shit out of everyone at lightweight for a few years and was that ultra dominant champion like Khabib, and who was actually like a madman and in the
Yeah.
same vein as John Jones, kind of a sociopath in the cage.
Yeah.
Um,
And a lot of
so-
people, we've talked about this, like he's like all of his losses recently, like paint this like kind of distorted picture of him. You know, he basically
yeah.
has as many losses as wins now. Um,
Ugh.
but we do have to give credit where credit's due, because BJ Penn is the one who is he's the one that people credit to saving the lightweight and therefore all of the lighter divisions in the UFC. I mean, Dana White
Absolutely.
said that they had already gotten rid of the lightweight division. Then they brought it back, and then they were thinking about getting rid of it again because it was like the theory was people didn't like watching smaller guys. They couldn't get the knockouts. It wasn't entertaining fights. I don't know what the fuck people are talking about because lightweight is like the most exciting dynamic division. We've talked about that like ad nauseum now, but he's really the reason to keep the lightweight division and therefore eventually like bring in these even lighter divisions from the WEC. Like if there was no lightweight division, like would the WC ever be like folded into the UFC and included with all these lighter weight divisions, which have some of the biggest names and biggest draws now in the sport? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. It does show that Dana White is a Just Bleed fan because I know it was like it had to be BJ Penn because you needed somebody so insane and so kind of whacked out that he licked the blood of his opponents and ate it in front of them. That's the kind of fighter that Dana White loves, and that's what BJ Penn brought, right? Like for a lot of these divisions, and same thing with like Dana saying women will never fight, and then it took like Ronda Rousey coming in and being so dominant and kind of like, off-putting. Then he was like, great, that's gonna be the reason to bring him in. He's because of how he tainted. Well, I don't want to say how he tainted, but how the end of his career went. That it feels very tainted, but like again, if he had walked away after the Diego Sanchez fight, like he has nearly a perfect career.
Or even the Frankie Edgar fights, you know?
Yeah.
The first two, not the last one, but
Yeah.
it could have been like, okay, respectable, you know? And
Yeah.
his career is still respectable, but
Yeah.
it does like most people, will not have the admiration and love for BJ Penn that older fans remember or have for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even like after those Frank Yeager fights, he still knocks out Matt Hughes. He takes John Fitch to a draw. He loses to Nick. I mean, he retired after the Nick Diaz fight, and we'd still be like, "Damn, look at that," So, yeah, BJ Penn, a legend, an absolute shit-eating wild man. Yeah, I wish people, knew what it was like to watch BJ Penn perform too, because it was always just like, it always had kind of the air of like, oh man, I can't win. Like this is lamb to a slaughter. He was good. Anyway, all right. Well, this has been Two Fight Fans podcast where we kind of just talked about a bunch of stuff, and then BJ Penn. I'm One Fight Fan Stewart.
I'm the other Colin.
And join us next week where we preview some fights. We'll talk about probably this heavyweight fight, and probably bitch and moan more about the Sphere.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, everybody. Bye.
Bye.